Guys, another Sales Wisdom podcast with Jen Allen today with us. She is community growth at Lavender. So we're going to talk about community, which is one of my favorite topic. Jen, can you introduce yourself? Tell us about Lavender and the other ventures that you work at. I see SaaS Bros here, which is interesting.
Yeah, so I joined Lavender in January in the community growth role after 18 years of being a frontline salesperson for CEB and Challenger, which is the Challenger sales methodology. So it's my first time in marketing. My job is engaging with our community. It's standing up partnerships. It's thinking through opportunities to engage with our community in real life at events and things like that. And yeah, Lavender, for those that don't know it, it is a cold email coaching tool. So think if you had a manager over your shoulder who wrote the world's best emails, giving you guidance on what to kill, what to cut, what to add. And it all happens right in the inbox. So really happy to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Love it. My pleasure. CEB, now Gartner, almost 15 years you spent there. What did you learn from? That's a lot of times. Like, how can I say 1.5 decade? I mean, that's my mind can't even wrap itself around that. What did you learn from these years from your life? Like
Yeah.
at this position? Yeah, tell us.
Well, it was interesting. I was never, like many people in sales, I never saw myself going into sales. So I
Okay.
really learned how to sell there. I learned how not to sell there too, like all of us. But basically what I was selling at CEB was annual subscriptions to research on best practices for CMOs and heads of sales. So every year we'd poll sales leaders, poll marketing leaders, and they would say, here's the number one thing we can't figure out this year. We want to understand how others are doing it. So the reason I think I stayed there so long was because the product essentially changed every year, right? Every year there was a new topic, and it just always was something that I personally was really intellectually curious about. And so it made it easy to stay there for as long as I did because I was selling the same product, but the nature of what we talked about changed so dramatically.
What about Challenger Sales? What can you tell us about it? I read the book. I think I forgot who the author was. It was quite good, and it's quite thrown around a lot in the sales world. So tell us about the methodology and tell us how you applied it there.
Yeah. So when Challenger first came out, it was actually at the 08, 09 economic downturn. And so the question all of the sales leaders that were clients of ours had was, we don't actually know how to tell our people to sell right now. We've got like a small percentage of our employees who are killing their number, regardless of what's going on in the economy, but we don't even know what they're doing to teach other sellers who are not. And so essentially it became the world's largest analysis of what drives sales performers. It was up to, I think, about 40,000 sellers that were surveyed. And basically what it told us is when we are in sales, we're typically very focused on what we do, and we try to get other people to care. It taught us that actually what buyers are looking for is insight about their own business, not insight about ours, not about how like great our product is, but can you teach me something that upends what I've always assumed is how we approach doing business? And so it really raised the game for a lot of sellers, myself included, because when I first saw the book and heard the findings, I was like, I'm not doing any of this in my sales conversations. And so it gave me confidence to know if I really focused on looking at that customer's business, making an observation, suggesting a potential like flawed assumption or belief, and framing it as a way of, I want to have a conversation about the potential problem as opposed to the solution. That's where we saw sellers winning. So it really changed my entire sales approach. And to this day, I still use it.
I read that you overbooked your quota. Well, on your LinkedIn says 5.9 million on a 4.9 million goal. So first question, what quota achieving advice would you have? And then tell us how to actually lead a team to meet these hard quotas that are imposed. And nowadays it's harder than ever to actually meet your quota. I believe the stats tell that 29% of the teams of the sales teams are reaching their quotas. So I think that advice will be very much needed and appreciated.
Gosh, that number is horrifically low and sad, but I think it's kind of counterintuitive, but I think the more you focus on your quota number, the worse behaviors you develop. So what I mean by that is if I'm constantly thinking I'm behind quota, I've got to catch up on quota, it forces me to behave in a way that repels my buyers. And so when I think one of the biggest lessons that I was fortunate to learn early is your quota is going to happen regardless of what I do. Like my quota is only achieved by what my buyers do. It has nothing really to do with me. And so I need to have conversations that allow my buyers to come to realizations that would land them in our favor. And so what I would say to everybody is like, one, disqualifying is just as important as qualifying. Knowing who not to spend time with, especially right now, is so incredibly important. This is my first time selling in SaaS. And when you have a cool product, people are curious. They want to take a look. But every 30 minutes you spend with someone who isn't feeling the problem that you solve for at a really, really strong level is 30 minutes you just don't get back. So with time being our most finite resource, we've got to be really, really curious about what triggers would indicate that someone has the problem that we solve for, and it's so bad that they'd be willing to do something about it, versus just saying, I'm going to send as many emails, make as many cold calls as possible, and hoping that a bullet hits a bullet. So that's number one. And then number two, particularly right now, this was a big mindset shift for me. We have to remember that we as humans rarely respond to the realization of a benefit. Like this came to life for me with my wedding when I got married a couple months ago. I was setting my alarm every day at like 5 a.m. being like, I'm going to get up and go to the gym. But every day I would hit snooze because the pain of working out was so much bigger than like my current level of satisfaction with how I looked. Right. And at the end of the day, it ended up being like good was good enough for me. I didn't need to be better. But when we have or perceive that there is pain, we respond to that more urgently. So if I had woken up one of those days and I had to go to the doctor and the doctor said, Jen, you're going to have a heart attack, all of a sudden comparing a heart attack versus going to the gym are two very different things, right? So it's like, as salespeople, we need to realize that humans aren't different when they buy. We have to be pain focused instead of benefit upside focused, at least for the very beginning, and then we can shift over time. Sorry, that was like a bit of a sermon.
Yeah, well, it's kind of comparing having nice legs in your wedding dress vs having a belly.
Yeah.
So the belly is like way more painful than having nice legs, right? I really love that analogy. And I do agree that basically if people get into that primal mindset, oh shit, I'm going to miss quota. Like, how am I going to put money on the table? I'm going to look dumb, I'm not going to get that award. I do indeed agree that people will start displaying behaviors that are not favorable, as not only in the short term, but they're killing their whole runaway most of the time because people view them as needy. So people need to be, salespeople need to be a bit more careful about that and kind of be stoic about things, right? What do I need to do? I don't need to become emotional and tell my buyer that, look, how am I going to put money on the table and be scarcity driven, but just stoic, do what you need to do. Check in these boxes and focus on that. For the teams aspect of it, because you led a team, I want to know what kind of advice you gave to your team. How big was your team, and how did you help them navigate these tough periods, when you were really ebbing at the bottom of the curve, because sun always comes down after the rain, right? But most humans, they're so focused on the rain and being caught up in the storm that they don't see the potential of a sun ever coming up again. What did you tell them? What did you tell your team when they were in tough periods?
Yeah. And to be clear, like I've never led a large team, so I don't ever want to front like I have. We were experimenting with a new org structure where we had 3 groups who sold into the same buyer, who typically or traditionally were 3 separate teams. They brought us all under one team, and I played kind of a player coach role, right? So I still had my own individual quota, but then I had to work with them. One of the biggest things that was difficult is there is territorialism, right? So if I'm trying to get the meeting with the CRO, you're trying to get the meeting with the CRO, I want my thing sold first. That created all sorts of tension, which is why we had to move to the new structure to begin with. And so there are 2 big things that I taught the team, which is 1, let the buyer's situation be the determinant of what we lead with. If we went into every deal trying to sell all three things at once, we would probably end up losing the vast majority of those deals. If we went into those initial conversations and said, let's really understand where the buyer's coming from, what is it that is urgent for them to solve, and then reflect on which of the three things or combination of the three things is most important, we will arguably win more of those deals, even if it means that we lose some of those deals individually. So I think that was a really important mindset, is to not everybody gets to eat at the table all the time, and that's okay. You'll eat more overall if you do it that way. And then two, this was actually ingrained in me by one of my managers, which is, if you have a deal and you cannot tell me what that company sells, how they sell it, and who they sell it to, you do not actually have a deal, because you do not know that buyer. And I was really lucky to learn that early on. And I think the simplicity of that and the consistency of always asking that question made it so that the team knew what to expect, and then made it so that we were truly buyer focused when we were having those conversations.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way many times, onboarding a client. So what do? Do they have this product market fit advantage, and it always ended up the wrong way. So talk about these scarcity behaviors, let's hurry up to the finish line. And yeah, it must have been really challenging to deal with a team that's competing one against another. I can't imagine myself in that as a startup guy that almost spent no time in sales team, but thank you for sharing all of that. I want to step up to challenger first. How did you get that job?
Yeah, if you notice in my career, it's about every 2 years I would change my job at the same company, because I think I just got bored, right? So it was like, once I became comfortable with account management, I was like, ooh, sales is so scary. Maybe I want to try my hand at that. And so Challenger was part of CEB, but when Gartner acquired CEB, they spun off Challenger and put it under a private equity company. And so I moved with that. And it was a really interesting experience, because it was like an established brand, but we had no HR, we had no marketing. Like, it was like a true startup. So it was a really interesting experience to work there. But I moved over to that business unit because I wanted to sell bigger transformational 7-figure deals. And it scared the hell out of me. But I was like, if I'm going to make good money, if I'm going to have the kind of lifestyle that I want, I have to take on a challenge like that. So because we were in that team structure, I was able to move over pretty easily. And then, yeah, Challenger, which was just like so very different than selling a $50,000 price point. It was probably the best sales lesson of my career.
Yeah, I want to go back in time also to dig more value out of there. Like, where does your ambition come from, and that desire to have a better life for yourself, which everything considered equal, you've accomplished, and how does it feel to have that life?
That's a very nice question. It felt really good. My dad was a construction worker. My mom was an insurance agent. Neither of them went to college, but they always instilled in me, like, you can have whatever life you want if you work your ass off. And so I think part of it was just, I grew up in a really small town. I knew I wanted to live in a city. There were all sorts of like personal drivers. And then once I felt confident in sales, I just wanted to keep challenging myself to see how big I could grow. And I think that is the beautiful side of sales that we forget sometimes. Like, sales can be such a grind. It can be such a confidence buster. But when you're doing well, man, it's like an incredible feeling to be able to feel like, I've made this and I've made this life for myself. That's kind of what kept me going, is the taste of that.
And when will it be enough? Will there ever be enough?
Oh my gosh, you sound like my husband. I don't know. Like right now I'm having a lot of fun. I'm doing totally different job in marketing. I've never done it before. My speaking business is going pretty well. I think when I'm not having fun is when I'll be done.
Good answer. I want to talk about podcasting because you've done a lot of it, 52 weekly podcast episodes, and you grew the pod from 2 to 20K listeners slash downloads. Yeah, downloads more than listeners. What lessons have you got from there? How do you get your guests invited? What types of questions you ask? You might notice my format is pretty much Frankenstein. But I love it that way. I have my reasons, I learned quite a lot from this pod, which is the main reason, and I'm consistent. So tell us about like the insights that you've learned from running the pod and some tips that you have for us.
Yeah, I think we'd probably share a lot of the same lessons learned. It's so much about the guest. It is so much about making them the star of the show. Like you're doing it right now with me. I think some people get into podcasting because they want to be the star. If you want to be the star, guest on shows. Don't host one because it really does require exactly like you're doing, right? I always equate great podcast hosts to great salespeople. You've obviously prepped a ton. You're asking questions about me that show that you've done preparation. You're a great active listener. Like these are all skills that once I got in it, I realized how much they were beneficial to me as a salesperson. I became a much better listener. My prep was so much stronger because if you have a guest on and they feel like you don't know anything about them, the experience is so icky and awful. And so the way I would find guests is when I was on LinkedIn, I would think about who do I wish I could have learned from when I was early in my sales career? Who are those people? And then I want to ask them all the questions that Jen 10 years ago would have asked them. So I forget who said this, but someone gave me the advice like, when you're podcasting, you're not podcasting to yourself as the ideal listener. You're podcasting to who you were 10, 15 years ago. And it really helped me. I don't know what you think, but it really helped me in the questions I asked the guests that I brought on.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. Depends on the audience, I would say. Me, I often talk about this, but it's still very selfish kind of the pod. So I assume that my audience somewhat similar to me. And should I describe them in very broad and almost vulgar words as SaaS bros or Silicon Valley bros, people with like no filters that are really much into startup and into sales. I fully agree with getting better at sales. You know, to me nowadays, sales is about listening and saying what's on my mind. You know, I don't have any filter. I'm honest and think it's about kindness and empathy for the other person, but also with myself, right? I mess up a lot in these interviews, stumble over my words. I've had horrible interviews with actually that, do you know David Allen? He shares the same family name as me.
No.
He's the productivity guy, GTD, a legend, basically. And I was quite intimidated, you know, quite anxious, and I really messed up the interview. And I keep saying that, so I need to stop saying it. But it's the empathy to say, like, oh, yeah, there will be other interviews or there will be better ones, because it's also a state of energy. Sometimes you're kind of low energy, and some other times, like, no, I'm feeling good, you know. So that we can assume this pod will be good. But it's such an underrated tool. I'm not sure if you would agree, but just to meet interesting people and to get smarter.
I completely agree. I was just on one earlier today where I was saying they were asking advice for younger sellers. And my number one piece of advice is the barrier to entry to start a podcast now is so low.
Solo.
Literally anyone can do it. So pick the people you admire and bring them on. Some of them will say no. That's okay. That's sales. That's like exactly just like sales. Some of them will say yes, but you're selling someone's time. And that is a skill that like we all have to be strong at in sales. So I completely agree with you. If I could go back 15 years ago and do something different, it would have been getting involved in this so much earlier. I would have been such a better salesperson for it.
Yeah, but we're like, oh, I'll never be this legend. I'll never be like this Tim Ferriss or this Joe Rogan, and we constantly like excuse ourselves from doing that. And I started offering, you know, podcasting as a service as one of my agencies, and I can see it in my clients. You know, they're full of excuses. How will I get in touch with these guests? Then I'm no podcast host. You know, do you know how to ask questions? Do you do sales calls? Are you a leader, a CEO? So yeah, the barriers to entry are super low. And nowadays I'm kind of obsessing on 1% improving my podcast product. I'm going slowly but surely. For example, I'm still kind of low edit, but I'm getting there, you know, and I'm really passionate about it. Just like I'm passionate about community, which is our last ultimate topic. One thing that a lot of sales, very successful sales folks like yourself have kind of put myself onto this year has been communities. Communities are so win-win. It's like uniting similar minded folks or folks that can benefit from one another. That's how us humans, we've seen the light of day, and that's why we're here, because we're social beings. We're putting them in a room and we're letting them do beautiful things with the structure, hopefully. So tell us about community and why you're so bullish on community.
Yeah, first of all, I love that description. When I joined this community role, like I said, I'd never done it. And when Will, the co-founder, said, "We want you for this job," I was like, "I can give you 5 names of people who've set up communities before." And he was like, "I don't want the person who set up a Slack community. To me, community is being able to have a reputable voice within the audience that we want to help." And he's like, "When I look at you, you have a reputable voice." And so that was the big turning point for me that made me say yes, because I was like, we don't even have our own community. People laugh. They're like, "You don't even have a lavender community," but our community exists in the channels where they go to learn already. Like, it's in the Slack groups of other formal communities. It's on LinkedIn. And what I love about it is it's not forcing people to come to us. It is going where they go, sharing things that help without any expectation of a return, and just trusting that if you help people, they will come back around at some point, right? And maybe they don't, that's okay. But I think that's what makes me love this job, is because it isn't just a formal Slack community, which is how I kind of just viewed community beforehand. It's just helping people in a way that we're sharing things without making it like you have to give me your email or you have to like fill out this form. And I think that's really kind of cool and organic.
Such a challenge though, right? To make it seem natural. I've started my masterminds, I think a year ago, and I think I finally found my platform to invite people to. At first I thought it would be Slack, although I didn't like Slack much. And I'm like LinkedIn messages, which is odd, but I'm still uncertain, as you can note. So where should I start? It won't be LinkedIn groups, that's for sure. People have suggested Facebook groups. I've done them. I have a lot of possible tracks, but I don't know exactly where to start. What would be your recommendation there?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question that you ask us instead of just building something, which is, I think, the mistake a lot of companies make, and then hoping they can pull people to it. The answer I always give to this question is talk to your customers and your ideal customers and ask them, where do you go to learn about topics related to what I do?
Wow.
So for us, right, a lot of salespeople, SDRs, SDR leaders who we are trying to sell to go to LinkedIn to learn. So it's really logical for us to just have a pretty sizable presence on LinkedIn. But there was another group that came up in those discussions called SDR leaders, and it was something I'd never heard of. It was this private community of people who have the SDR leader job, which, if we think about it, it's often they're a first-time manager. There may be 1 or 2 of them at the company. There's so much uncertainty. They're managing large teams of people who are struggling right now. Like, we heard that, we're like, that's where we should be teaching, because these are people that are hungry for this kind of information. And so I think if we didn't have those conversations, we would have never heard about that group. So I always just say, let your buyer kind of tell you when you have a problem, where are the first 5 places and who are the first 5 people you're going to, and then you can spider web it out.
Right. So not so much as sticking for the tools and its function, although I was thinking of branching out on Discord, because I use Midjourney quite a lot there, and I have a lot of
Oh,
faith
yeah.
in the tool.
So cool.
But one last question related to this, which is not related necessarily to the tool, but the behaviors of a community itself. For example, I've been invited to these WhatsApp group with 500 message, and I'm like, I want to enter that, like I'm already so short on time as a CEO. And it's like, oh, maybe these folks are not at the same level as me. So I have all these demons surfacing left and right for me not to integrate and interact. And then there's so many people. And then do you like go one-on-one in rooms with them to get to know them and so forth? I don't know where to start, even as a community users, which is why I'm confused as per starting my own community. So what advice would you have for that?
I love this question. I'm in favor of smaller, more niche communities for the exact reason you mentioned. When I go into a Slack community, it's like 20,000 people. I'm like, get me the hell out of here. This is too much. Everybody's pitching themselves. Like, I just don't think it's a lot of learning. So I'm much more in favor of starting small and trusting the system that if you help a core group of people and you develop an actual relationship with them, the word of mouth effect on that will amplify what you're doing. I think the temptation of these larger communities is, well, look at the numbers. If I can get 10%, like that's a big number, but everybody's thinking that, right? So I would say, even if you just take top 20 voices that you really admire and offer something of value, like this is something I'm learning and I want to share it back with you, and you get those 20 people hooked, who's to say those 20 people won't share what you've shared with them with their own networks? And then that just magnifies quicker than I think we often believe that it will.
Love it. So every now and then you'll see me share articles that I love or documentaries on my LinkedIn, which is an odd thing to do, but I think that could be one, or just make a guide, package it up myself and post it in the convo. And if people like it, well, I'll get a bunch of friends and possibly customers. So that could actually be a start. Thank you for inspiring that insight in me.
I love
So
that. That would be a
yeah.
badass way to start. Do it.
Yeah, it's like an easy 0 to 1 start. So I'm really bullish about communities. So yeah, thank you again for that. That's the pod. Basically, where can people find out a bit more about you, Jen?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, and make it nice and easy. We've been talking about it a lot. I'm Jen Allen Knuth, K-U or Knuth on LinkedIn. That's my go-to.